Hello, and today I'm going to be simulating basically a battle royale, a free-for-all in Europe right before the start of World War II, or a few months before that. As you can see, Germany hasn't finished off Czechoslovakia, and obviously World War II hasn't started. Poland still exists, Finland is still big, etc. But, I mean, honestly, let's just get started immediately. France. Why don't we start off with you? You are going to be one of the first nations to start massive offensives, pushing your influence further into southern Belgium, and of course into Luxembourg, who really stands absolutely no chance against you. France, as I hope you know, is far more powerful than this tiny little country right here known as Luxembourg. But this will be the first place where France meets some resistance, as Germany is of course also going to be attempting to push into the Benelux, which is most likely their best chance at expanding in the early battles. This confrontation is actually evenly matched. Germany's army is superior, but they are of course in Central Europe, and they have far more fronts to worry about, especially over here with Poland. Sadly for Poland, they're the sandwich. Everyone knows the story of Poland. They're not going to survive very long. Germany quickly takes control of the Polish corridor and Danzig, whilst also pushing towards key cities like Posen in central Poland. Aside from this, Germany begins two other offensives. We got the Benelux, the Polish. We have the northern push for Copenhagen. This one is actually not going to do amazing as they don't dedicate much effort to it. And the Alpine push, which is likely going to be their hardest ever, as here, if you didn't know, there's a river, and of course, the very famous Alpine mountains are going to be slowing down the German advance massively. Unluckily for Switzerland, they simply are surrounded by three of the most powerful nations in Europe and don't stand much of a chance. Somebody who does stand a very large chance is the UK, who swiftly pushes down into Ireland, capturing most of the important regions. However, Ireland does not surrender just quite yet. The UK also begins operations into Iceland, staging multiple small naval invasions. At this point, Iceland is still controlled by Denmark, but with the fall of Reykjavik and a few other territories in the south, it will not last for very long. Meanwhile, over in the Nordics, Sweden was neutral. Their army wasn't big. Finland, I don't know the exact stats, but let's say they were a bit more ready for war, as was clear while they were at war with Russia. However, Sweden does have very important resources, while Finland is going to be fighting Russia at the same time. So when it comes to the Nordics, I'm putting my bet on Sweden doing the best. Pushing into southern Norway, perhaps even to Oslo eventually, while also pushing into the resource-rich north of the Nordic countries. Finland, meanwhile, is going to have their hands full fighting against the Russians. This is, of course, going to be clear when the Soviets start their massive advance into southern Finland, trying to capture Helsinki as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, they capture a key Finnish city here, which I forgot the name of. It might start with a V. I don't remember the name. But it was the second largest city in Finland at the time, and it is still a major blow to the nation. Down in the Baltics, well, let's just ignore them for now, because eventually Russia will capture them completely. That is undoubted. There's no doubt in my mind that the Soviets will eventually push into all those lands, but we can assume that Germany is also going to start a few offensives of their own to ensure that they have control over Lithuania. Germany and Italy in this scenario also not very good allies, so Germany would attempt an invasion. It would fail. Germany is simply surrounded by too many powers and cannot fight all of them. Down in the Balkans, we're going to focus on the major players over here. Turkey. Military wasn't the largest in the world, but it was definitely enough to combat Bulgaria, who still hadn't fully recovered from the previous, recently removed army restrictions. Romania, who, I don't know if this was the biggest they've ever been in history, but they were sure as hell massive at the time, is also going to start to push down south into Bulgaria, and honestly, their odds aren't very good here. They're also going to start a push into Hungary. As Horthy, I'm sorry, but this is not going to hold on for very long. However, the Soviets are maybe the ones in the best position here. Honestly, my bet's on them to win this. I'm just kind of going with it, so who knows, they may come out on top, they may not. But they're surrounded by far weaker nations, and their push into Poland is without a doubt going to be one of the most successful. This is rural regions that Poland simply does not have the resources to worry about, and thus a Soviet push is undoubted. The German push would probably be harder, and honestly, this is right after the Soviet purge. Their army is not in a good position, but since they are surrounded by weaker nations, and Germany, who's going to be their first major power enemy, is perhaps not in the best position, right next to Italy and France, while struggling in Switzerland, may not have the best chance. Down here in Iberia, Spain is screwed. Honestly, Portugal's probably in a better position. If you didn't know, the nationalists had just now won the Spanish Civil War after a decent amount of time of fighting and a lot of bloodshed. So there's no doubt in my mind that despite the Pyrenees, the French would be making mass advances. And even the Portuguese, who many do not consider them strong, I don't either, they would be making pushes into Galicia and perhaps even other regions of Spain. The Spanish military is simply too weak and disunited. I would not be surprised if the Republicans tried again and much of the military rebelled against the nationalists. Meanwhile, in Africa, not much of Africa is shown on this map as it is a European map, but France would just conquer the whole thing. Obviously, there are other powers down there. We can't see them. We don't worry about them. Meanwhile, if we look over at Greece, they're going to be starting a push into Albania, who nearly fully capitulates quickly, and into Macedonia, including southern Bulgaria. That is very straightforward, not very detailed, but I don't want this video to take 10 years, so we're just going to have to go for not very detailed. Back over to Germany, they would quickly capture all of Czechia and Moravia, which are parts of Czechoslovakia, while Slovakia itself is struggling, mainly under Hungarian pushes. As even though Hungary is struggling to hold, the way this works, they're also starting their own offensives at the same time. So after capturing Bratislava, Slovakia simply doesn't stand a chance. The rest of them would fall either to Poland, Hungary, etc., but they are going to be our second nation to fall after Luxembourg. Meanwhile, Switzerland is going to be feeling the pressure of three of the biggest and strongest nations in all of Europe pushing on their border. They're obviously going to do their best to hold out, but their odds are not looking so good. Not looking very good at all, honestly. With Italy, Germany, and France pushing on you, what can you realistically do? They're just going to try and hold out in their central regions around Bern and see how it goes. Meanwhile, Italy is seeing much success over in Yugoslavia, as they have pushed massively down the Dalmatian coastline. And they are honestly having a very fun time pushing into Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia itself, should I give them some advances? Sure, why not? Northern Albania, there's maybe parts of Bulgaria. Bulgaria is collapsing. Sure, let's give them some parts of Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. I'm not going to go too into detail with them, or with any of the minor powers, because they're in the end going to die. Meanwhile, the Netherlands, I've left them untouched. I'm just going to go ahead and divide up the Benelux. Once again, I can't go into too much detail, but we all know what happened. They simply can't go against French and German advances. If you're wondering why Germany doesn't just barrel down the French like they did in our timeline, first of all, they can't. And second of all, it's too many fronts for them. They are fighting too many people over in Poland, over against France. Denmark is not an issue, but down south against Italy is definitely an issue. And they are struggling with that. They are definitely struggling with that. Meanwhile, the UK, I haven't talked about them over here in England in a while. I'm just going to give them all of Ireland. Nobody else can touch it. All of Iceland. Nobody can really stop them. They still have the largest navy at this point, and if this is truly a free-for-all and we want everyone to invade everyone, they would start a mass invasion of Norway, as that would be their next easiest target, especially using their massive navy. From there, Norway would be quick to capitulate, as the UK is focusing almost 100% on this. They have no other land attacks going anywhere, so Norway would swiftly capitulate. to a combined British-Swedish effort. If you're wondering who would win here, once again, the Nordics, the UK has their full army. I have no doubt that Sweden would be pushed back very, very quickly away from Oslo and the most crucial Norwegian lands, only holding on to the north. Sweden, in the meanwhile, would be taking advantage of a very weak Finland. The Soviets are known for their winter attacks, but I would argue the Nordics were better at it. The Soviets would at the same time be nearing Helsinki and capturing the south of Finland. The Finnish have no support here. No help is coming. They are solely on their own against the Soviets. I get that in real life they did better, but this is going by very quickly, as if you wanted me to do a solo Finnish-Soviet war, it would be far more in detail. Meanwhile, Riga, the Latvian capital, is captured, and with that the Baltics fall, besides a few Estonian islands. Overall, though, Russia and Germany divide up the region well. Meanwhile, over in Poland is already gone. Poland is holding out down south, barely holding on to Krakow and the surrounding regions, whilst the Germans are absolutely crushing them. Sadly for the Germans, they are now facing Soviet soldiers. And no offense, Poland, but you have a far weaker army than the Soviets do. And once they manage to finish off Finland, which is a decent amount in the future, but this isn't in real time, obviously. Once they manage to finish off the Finnish, their only real front in the north would be with Sweden. Sweden is currently facing the UK. They will not be a challenge. Sweden would also invade Denmark at this point. You might be surprised by how well they're doing, and that is because they normally wouldn't do this well. They are simply taking advantage of the fact that, their neighbors are dead. Their neighbors are not a fight. Denmark especially was focusing on Germany, so as soon as the Swedes came, the Swedes conquered. France, meanwhile, would be doing extremely well down south in Spain, managing to capture much of the region. If you doubt this, maybe it's unrealistic, but what can you say about this scenario, truly? Switzerland would also eventually fall to surrounding powers. Who knows who would get to burn first? Who knows who would get the most land? But Switzerland could not hold out forever. Italy and France would also be fighting at this point, France capturing Sardinia to secure their control of the Mediterranean, whilst the Italians and French are trading lands along the border. Honestly, I might have France doing too well here, but that will change very soon. The UK has been doing absurdly well in Sweden, easily destroying their troops in any encounter they have. It's really just a matter of how fast can they go without their troops starving, while still having supply. Thus, they begin a much more difficult invasion over in Brittany and Normandy. A combined invasion of these two regions is putting a massive toll on the French lines, as their homeland is now being attacked in the north. I don't know how far they would get, but France is incredibly overstretched. And England is in an almost perfect position, with their only other land army that they're fighting being the Swedish, who are quickly collapsing. They also have a massive navy, so they can easily raid French ports and destroy much of their infrastructure. The nationalists in Spain, I get that they would be fighting better than this, but they simply have no government structure, and they would quickly collapse. Who knows to who, but I think it would be mainly to the French. Perhaps the Portuguese would gain some lands from it as well. Once again, they look big, they look strong. Not really. Let's also go ahead and finish off Poland. They would not be alive for very much longer, as German, Soviet, and even now, surprisingly enough, Hungarian troops are advancing on the nation, and they simply don't stand a chance. They do not stand a single... Oh my god. It's like the exact same color, isn't it? Okay, Hungary, I'm going to give you a new attack color. I think it's quite clear by now that I don't have this pre-planned. I just chose the colors as I was going. But as I was saying, the Soviets and Hungarians are now meeting, and the Soviets are absolutely demolishing the Hungarians. Their armies are not very strong, and the Soviets are still in a decent position despite their military's, I don't want to say incompetence, but weakness. Over in the Baltics, they are slowly pushing the Germans back. That's simply because they control more important regions, and Germany is focusing elsewhere. That is against Sweden, who is quickly collapsing. And with southern Sweden captured, they now fully control the Baltic, which there isn't really trade here, but that would still be very, very annoying for the Russians, who are swiftly making progress into Finland and may even soon reach some more core Swedish territories. Sweden would attempt to hold on a little longer, but I'm just gonna show you what it looks like in the end, as there's no doubt that they would capitulate quickly under, literally, the Soviets, the UK, and the Germans. Combined attacks. They simply don't stand a single chance. The British would likely get the biggest share, as they did the most work. The Russians were only pushing into barely inhabited northern lands, and the Germans were just doing this as a bit of a side project to close off the Baltic, whilst the British were focusing large amounts of manpower and energy on the region. So that's about what the Nordics look like now. You can already tell all weaker powers are going to be gone very quickly. Greece is only still alive because they haven't met any of these greater powers, and Bulgaria at this point has died completely. Perhaps to Romania, perhaps to Yugoslavia. They would not make it much further. Meanwhile, Romania is doing terrible against the Soviets, but well against everyone else, as they are absolutely crushing the Yugoslavians. If you're wondering how is that possible, it's very simple. It's thanks to the Italians. Italy has practically completely destroyed Yugoslavia all on their own. Nobody else has done anything meaningful against them. And Italy has just demolished them, whilst at the same time holding back German advances in the Alps. That's not very difficult for them. It's the Alps, it's easy to hold. And it's Italian core terrain. Meanwhile, the French would be looking to destroy Portugal to close off this front. But surprisingly enough, it would be the British who come down to quell the nation. The British and French would now be the largest adversaries, as although the UK now has fronts in the Nordics to deal with, the one against the Russians is cold, barren wasteland at best, and the one against the Germans, well, Germany is already struggling. You know what, let's just finish off the Balkans. They would survive longer than this, but let's give them some borders to deal with here. The Italians get most of the land, as they did most of the work. They even start to push up into Hungary. Meanwhile, Hungary would likely be the next to go. I don't see them surviving much longer after this. Joint Romanian, Italian, and especially German advances completely cripple the nation. So this is what the world is now looking like. I would argue the Balkans are the only place, aside from Portugal, that still has minor powers, although none of the most powerful nations have died yet. France is actually managing to hold back in Brittany very well. They have completely crushed the Normandy landings, and they're exchanging battles with the UK everywhere else. Okay. Meanwhile, the Italians are kind of just stuck in their corner, and they're mainly going to focus on quelling the Balkan threat. How are they going to do this? By just sticking it to the Greeks. They're going to start to destroy Greece in every possible way, together with Turkey, who has a nice little cornered off section of the world here. And soon enough, Greece will die as well. That is simply just without a doubt. I'm gonna color them all in, but it's obviously not gonna be all of them that fall. Damn it. Alright, there we go. The Italians do manage to capture a decent amount of the West, but it is simply not enough. The Italians are not happy, and soon enough, Italo-Turkish wars would begin. Meanwhile, Turkey would also be fighting against the Romanians, who are now in the worst spot out of anybody. They are losing lands in Bulgaria. They are losing lands in Yugoslavia, including Belgrade, a very important city. And most importantly, they are on the verge of losing their capital to the Soviets. That is simply an unwinnable position for them. Meanwhile, the Germans would be doing okay, especially in Sweden, where now that the UK is busy elsewhere, their armies are struggling in the region. Over in the Benelux, it would actually be a lot more back and forth. It's mainly plains in the region, so it's hard to fight in. But I'm not going to be showing that because, like I said, it would just be France pushes here, Germany pushes back. Back and forth, just murder everywhere. And with Italy, possibly the next to fall. Is that all minor powers gone? Well, let's finish off Romania real quick, because they are likely the next one to die. With them even managing to push into Hungary out of Romanian territory. They were by far the ones who did the most. They even managed to capture the Romanian capital before the Turks managed to arrive. Something along those lines. And of course, the next to fall would be Portugal. They're not in a perfect position. They're not in the worst position, I'll admit. They're kind of sectioned off, but they simply lack the manpower and the strength to hold on for very much longer. So soon enough, the British landing, combined with the French invasion, would completely crush the nation. You might be saying, well, the British and the Portuguese are allies. You know who else is allies? A lot of people in this world. There's no doubt about it. And now the British would nearly solely focus on the French, giving up much of Sweden and Norway to the Germans and the Russians, only holding on to Oslo and some other very, very crucial lands in the process, while giving up just about everything else. Damn, okay, there we go. Sweden thinks they can survive there, well, they cannot. The British and French are fighting, and honestly, it's going to be one of these two who dies next, either Italy or France, and my bet is on Italy. The Germans, despite difficulty pushing in the Alp Mountains, are managing breakthrough after breakthrough, getting closer and closer to Venice, a key important Italian city in the north, while also nearing Milan. Meanwhile, their advances in the Balkans have been crushed by the Turks, who, although they are obviously weaker than the Italians, are once again just in a pretty good position over in the corner, with their only real enemy being the Soviets, whose military is incompetent. Their leaders are struggling at best, and their army is overstretched along a massive front. We are now down to our last, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 nations, including the Soviet Union, the German Reich, the French Republic, the United Kingdom, and the Kingdom of Italy, which wasn't a kingdom, but just came out right. Italy, however, would be struggling. The French managed to capture Genoa, along with a city that starts with T that I can't remember, and much of their lands that they captured from Switzerland. Meanwhile, the Germans were barreling in from the north. Italy, once again, has their mountains to thank for not dying yet, but mountains can only really get you so far. You also have to have men on those mountains, which would not be happening here in Italy right now. And you have to have guns to use on them, which Italy does not have after fighting a war in Ethiopia and supporting the nationalists. They simply do not have the arms necessary to wage a war. They are also far from ready. Maybe in a few years they would have been prepared and done better, but currently they are not in that position. The British are also continuing to hammer into French lands, recapturing Normandy. Those islands are actually British. Don't know why I gave them to France, but the British recapture them, so good for them. Meanwhile, the Soviets haven't been talking about them much, but they are crushing the Germans. It has been years at this point. The Soviets have basically saved themselves. They are back under somewhat more competent leadership and pushing back the German lines quickly. Germany, I mean, as they've said many times, is in Central Europe. They are a Central European nation. They are at the center of all of Europe. It is normally a benefit as they are at the center of trade routes, and they have influence in many regions, but it can also be a downside in a fight like this. They can't just ally one side, fight the other. They have to fight both sides at the exact same time. And that is how they would be falling apart, as the French managed to capture the Saarland, parts of the Rhine, and most of Belgium. That is the first piece of core German land that falls, and it would not be the last. From here, the Italians, well, they would start to fall apart. The Germans are actually the ones making most of the progress here, as they manage to push south massively, while the French are making similar but less progress, also starting a naval invasion in Sicily, using their strength in Africa, and oh, look, Little Malta, I forgot to talk about them. They're gone. They never stood a chance. And Italy, who still has a ton of troops over in Yugoslavia, maybe not the best idea to put large amounts of your army in an area where you cannot supply them, where the locals want to kill you, and where your enemies have far, far more supply. This region would not hold on for very long, and although it is nobody's focus except for maybe Turkey, it would fall soon after to Turkish and German forces. From here, Turkey, you may be thinking, how are they doing this well? They have captured multiple territories and very, very important cities in Belgrade and Bucharest, along with all of Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania. They have been doing that because other people just had bigger problems to deal with over in the West. That's over now. The Soviets decide, hey, Germany's too hard, let's go kill the Turks. And in a swift motion, they destroy most of the progress that Turkey has made, crush their army, and now Turkey has very few people left wanting to fight this war. The Germans also take advantage of this Soviet push to gain some lands in Yugoslavia. Really seems like a line is starting to form over in the east. Over in the Nordics, the UK might want to hold on to this. I honestly couldn't say, but I think Germany has the best chance of holding on to it. They have honestly just the best chance of owning the Nordics. They would be fine with that. They like the Nordics. And although they wouldn't be perfectly accustomed to the terrain, or even slightly, like the Russians maybe, the Russians simply have better things to deal with over in Poland. The French are also starting to fall apart, as over in Iberia, the UK is taking control, capturing Madrid and most of the surrounding territories. They're also making large amounts of progress in northern France. You might be thinking, why don't they just focus on that? And why they don't is because they would much rather just kill Italy. Italy is going to be our first major power here to completely die, as joint French-German invasion completely destroys them. France, maybe not the best idea there, because now the German army, which is in theory and in practice superior to yours, with a better use of tanks and superior generals, they are simply a better fighting force. And that better fighting force is now crushing your army in the Benelux. You are really not doing well right now. Maybe you should have focused a bit more on your homeland instead of on Italy, of all things. Turkey, who may be falling apart, would also be taking advantage of this French weakness to capture southern Italy. France is really looking like they're on their way out, but Turkey is also on their way out. Oh no, look out. The Russians have captured Istanbul. What they've wanted for so long, they now have. And that is really not good for Turkey, as they have now linked up throughout all of Thrace, and Turkish troops are being cut off and destroyed by Russian troops. The Balkans will not be Turkish for long, and neither will Italy. Italy will instead become German. I'm just going to skip forward a few years here. I don't have 2 more years to make this video. They capture most of Italy, and they start to crush French lines. They will not push through the Maginot. They are not dumb. They will push through the Benelux and capture parts of northern France. Meanwhile, the UK is getting swathes of progress over here. They have abandoned the Nordics. This is where their army is. And this is where they've been focusing for a long time. They meet up with their Iberian campaign, and you can really see the UK start to take hold of much of Western Europe. It is now a race to Paris, and England would win that, mainly due to Germany being distracted by the Soviets. And with that, France would very soon capitulate. The lines I cannot be sure about, but they are the next major power to fall apart. Honestly, Africa would fall to the British. We're not talking about other British possessions in the region, but simply due to their superior navy, the Mediterranean would now be put under their control. The Germans would meanwhile annex the rest of France, and it really seems that in a turn, Germany has now crushed France, and it is a three-way battle mostly. Let's just finish off Turkey. I'm sorry, Turkey. No one likes you. Nobody wants you to stay here. You've just survived by hiding, and nobody likes someone who doesn't fight very well, do they? No, they don't. The Soviets would capture much of the land. You know what? Let's actually give the British a bit, because I remembered to give them Cyprus. They could take control of much of the Mediterranean and parts of southern Turkey. Yeah, you know what? That's a bit more interesting now, isn't it? Meanwhile, the Germans take control of the rest of the Balkans. This is now a three-way war between the British over in the far west, the Soviets over in the east, and the Germans right in the center, being crushed from both sides. That's exactly what's going to happen. The Soviets, with a bit more time, have been able to regain much of their strength and are now pushing in on Germany. Although at this point, I don't know how much further they would go. Soviet casualties are twice as high as German ones. And with unrest in the Balkans, along with the UK pestering their naval routes, absolutely destroying them, along with capturing all of southern Anatolia and parts of southern Greece, they just don't know how much further they can go. The British are also getting all of the American aid, which obviously America isn't on this map, but outside aid would still be coming, even if not in troops, in food, supplies, and weapons, and the UK would be getting all of that. That is a major part of why they can push so hard, so fast, and so strong. They would start to advance in the Benelux, but honestly, I don't think anyone would be able to push further than this. Germany may be in the middle, but the British and Russians are also fighting in the south, and if the British would still be holding on to some lands in Norway, they would also be fighting there. I'm going to end it here. I don't know who would win. Maybe the Soviets would if they managed to get their military in order by now. Maybe the British do, using American aid and their superior navy. Or maybe the Germans just use their tanks, blitz through France, and crush the world. Either way, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.